Megan Price was young, vibrant, and full of life until she suddenly disappeared after a night out in downtown Chicago. When she didn't show up for work the next morning, her friends knew something was wrong. As the search intensified, all signs began to point towards someone close to her, a man with a secret past and disturbing behavior. While authorities faced roadblocks accessing phone records and navigating conflicting alibis, Megan's family and friends turned to the public for help, flooding the streets with flyers and media coverage. This full episode uncovers the chilling details behind Megan's disappearance, the struggles investigators faced, and the fight for justice in a case filled with shadows, secrets, and silence. Watch now and join the search for answers in one of the most unsettling missing persons cases in recent memory. It was a warm Friday night in late August when 27-year-old Megan Price stepped out into downtown Chicago with her friends. She had just gotten a promotion at work, and they were celebrating. She wore a light blue dress, silver hoops, and that kind of smile that draws people in. A friend later said, "She had that spark, the kind of energy that made the whole night feel special." Megan never made it home. Surveillance footage shows her leaving a rooftop bar just after 11:30 p.m., walking alone toward the rideshare pickup area on West Ontario Street. And then nothing. No sign of her on cameras past that point. No trace in nearby traffic cams. Her phone stopped pinging just 3 blocks later. Her rideshare request never completed. By 9 a.m. the next morning, Megan's co-workers grew concerned when she failed to show up for a team meeting, something she never missed. Texts went unanswered. Calls went to voicemail. By noon, her best friend and roommate, Jamie Carter, knew something was wrong. She filed a missing persons report that same afternoon. "I remember thinking, this isn't just someone who forgot to charge her phone." Megan was always careful. She always told us where she was. This wasn't her. Over the next 72 hours, the search for Megan Price would explode. Flyers flooded the city. Local news ran her story on repeat. Volunteers canvassed alleys, train stations, and underpasses. Her face-wide smile, soft eyes, shoulder-length brown hair was everywhere. The story was no longer just personal, it was public, and it was urgent. But behind the scenes, investigators were already facing challenges. Cell phone records were slow to process. Nearby businesses, some with critical surveillance footage, were reluctant or delayed in turning over data. And in Megan's social circle, a name kept coming up. A man she had met just a few months earlier. A man who presented himself as charming, but who had a past no one really knew about. His name was Ethan Cole. To Megan's friends, he was polite, quiet, always around, but never saying much. To Megan, he was something new, someone different from the guys she had dated before. But according to texts recovered from her phone, something about Ethan had begun to worry her. Just days before she vanished, she texted Jamie. "E's been acting weird. Showed up to my office unannounced. Said he just wanted to see where I work. Kinda sweet, but also kinda creepy." Another message, sent hours before her night out, simply read, "I think I'm done with him." The moment Ethan Cole's name entered the investigation, detectives began digging. On paper, he seemed unremarkable, and a consultant in his early 30s, with no criminal record in the state of Illinois, no traffic violations, no red flags. But when they broadened the search beyond state lines, a different picture emerged. In 2015, while living in Seattle, Ethan had been questioned, but never charged in the case of another missing woman, 25-year-old Lauren Hatch. According to reports, she vanished after telling friends she was meeting someone new for coffee. Her last known location? A coffee shop 2 blocks from where Ethan lived at the time. Her case went cold. He moved soon after. Detectives in Chicago now had a person of interest, but that wasn't enough. They needed evidence, and they needed it fast, because time was slipping away. In missing persons cases, especially adult women, the first 72 hours are critical. After that, the odds of recovery, live, or otherwise drop sharply. So they turned to Megan's phone. Although the device itself hadn't been recovered, her cloud data remained partially intact. Investigators found her GPS trail from the night she disappeared. Bar, sidewalk, rideshare zone. And then a strange detour, sudden shift westward, veering toward an alley behind an old building on Hubbard Street. The signal went dead shortly after. Why would she walk that way? She wouldn't. The alley wasn't a shortcut. It wasn't well lit. It wasn't near anything familiar, which meant one of two things. Either she was following someone, or she was being led there. Someone who knew that area well would know how to avoid cameras. One camera on the far corner of Hubbard captured a grainy image at 11:43 p.m., just 13 minutes after Megan was last seen on Ontario Street. Dark SUV with tinted windows, pulling slowly into the alley. It stopped for 37 seconds, then drove off. Investigators ran the plates. A leased vehicle registered to a tech startup at then Cole's employer. When confronted with this evidence, Ethan claimed he loaned the car to a colleague that weekend. But when asked for a name, he hesitated, then offered a name that didn't match any employee records. His story was unraveling. Meanwhile, Megan's best friend Jamie began her own search online. Through forums, podcasts, missing persons boards, she discovered something horrifying. 3 women in the greater Chicago area had gone missing over the past 2 years, each after attending events in the same downtown district, each around the same age, each last seen alone after leaving a bar or lounge. None of the cases had been conclusively solved. 2 bodies were found months later, both labeled as accidental drownings. But Jamie remembered something Megan once said during a late-night conversation. She told me, "If anything ever happened to me, you'd know, you'd feel it." I didn't understand it then, but now I feel it every single day. Investigators expanded their probe into Ethan's past relationships. What they found was a disturbing pattern: short-lived romances, controlling behavior, emotional manipulation, and in several cases, abrupt disappearances. One former partner who agreed to speak anonymously said, "He was charming at first, protective, but then it turned dark. He'd follow me, he'd gaslight me. And when I tried to leave, he told me I was just like the others. I didn't even know what that meant until I saw Megan's story on the news." Armed with this testimony, the SUV footage, and the inconsistencies in Ethan's statements, investigators obtained a warrant to search his apartment. Inside, they found several phone's burner devices with no SIM cards hidden behind a false wall panel in a storage closet. On one device, they recovered fragments of deleted texts. Some were mundane, others were chilling. One message read, "You shouldn't have said goodbye." Another, "You made me do this." Just like they all do. Still no body, still no direct evidence of what happened to Megan. But Ethan Cole was arrested and held on suspicion of unlawful restraint and obstruction of justice. As Ethan Cole sat in custody awaiting further charges, the case against him was growing, but it was still circumstantial. There was no body, no eyewitness, no confirmed footage of Megan entering his vehicle. And in the eyes of the law, that meant the foundation of the prosecution remained frustratingly incomplete. But then came a quiet breakthrough. Detectives reviewing the burner phones found in Ethan's apartment discovered that one of the devices had been connected to a personal hotspot in the early hours of the morning, just hours after Megan was last seen. That signal pinged off a tower near the outskirts of the city, close to an industrial corridor with few businesses, no security cameras, and even fewer reasons for someone like Ethan to be there. It was the kind of detail that meant nothing on its own, but everything when placed in the right context. Detectives pulled utility records. They found one warehouse, long abandoned, with no current tenant, but active electrical service for one single security light. They visited the location just after midnight. The light was still on. Inside, the warehouse was empty except for rusted machinery, some discarded construction equipment, and an old mattress shoved behind a stack of pallets. The floor was dirt and concrete, but near the rear exit, they found something. A torn piece of fabric, light blue. Fibers consistent with the dress Megan had been wearing the night she vanished. The area was sealed off. Forensics was called in. The fabric fragment was sent for DNA analysis, and what they found changed everything. Traces of blood. It's confirmed to belong to Megan Price. This was the first physical evidence directly linking Ethan Cole to Megan's disappearance and, possibly, her death. It changed the tone of the case. Now, the question wasn't if Megan had met with foul play, it was how, and whether justice would be served. Meanwhile, Megan's family was living through every parent's nightmare in real time. Her mother, Denise Price, had stopped speaking to most media outlets, but agreed to an emotional interview with a local Chicago reporter. "I still set a place for her at dinner," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "It's not denial, it's just hope. Because if I stop doing that, it means I've accepted she's not coming home, and I'm not ready for that." Her father, Scott, channeled his energy into advocacy, pressing lawmakers for better coordination in missing persons investigations, launching a foundation in Megan's name, and pushing for legislation that would streamline access to phone and cloud data in active cases. But while the family fought publicly behind the scenes, they were falling apart. Scott and Denise began living separately, each coping in their own way. Megan's younger brother dropped out of college. Friends described the home as quiet, heavy, filled with reminders no one could bear to remove. And yet, the case continued. In a stunning twist, a woman came forward and prompted after seeing Ethan's face on the news. She identified herself only as Laura and claimed to have dated Ethan 5 years earlier. Her story matched a pattern now becoming familiar: charm, control, secrecy, and fear. "He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person who mattered," she said. "But once he knew you trusted him, things changed. He'd show up where I worked, hated me texting other people. And when I tried to leave, he said I was just like the rest of them. He always made it sound like other girls had done something to deserve being cut off." Investigators pressed further. Laura agreed to wear a wire in a monitored conversation with Ethan, who had been released on bond under surveillance. The meetup happened in a public coffee shop. Laura asked casual questions about their past, about whether he'd ever been violent with anyone. Ethan was evasive, but he slipped. At one point, he leaned in and said, "You know, I would never hurt someone unless I had to." That line ambiguous, but chilling, was enough to convince prosecutors to push forward with charges of unlawful restraint, evidence tampering, and suspicion of murder. Pending further forensic results. But the biggest break was yet to come. It was a late September afternoon when forensics investigators returned to the abandoned warehouse near the city. West End, a hulking structure long forgotten by the city's planning department, a relic of industry, decay, and secrets. The earlier discovery of Megan's blood on a piece of her dress had turned the warehouse into a potential crime scene, but it hadn't yet revealed its full story. What lay beneath the concrete and silence was something that even the most seasoned investigators weren't prepared for. The team brought ground-penetrating radar, expecting to search for possible burial sites on the property's perimeter. But while scanning the northeast quadrant of the warehouse's foundation, just a few feet from where the mattress had been found, they detected an anomaly, a rectangular cavity beneath the concrete floor. Shallow, but unnatural. Recent. They began excavation immediately. Dust filled the air. The scent of wet earth rose quickly, and the shovel hit something solid wood, crate nailed shut, wrapped in a weatherproof tarp. Inside, they found more than they ever expected. The contents included several personal items belonging to Megan, a notebook she often carried, pages water-stained but legible, compact mirror with her initials etched in cursive, and a phone case empty, cracked, but still recognizable from the photos her family had provided. Tucked inside the notebook was a folded piece of paper that stunned the entire room. It was a letter, dated the night of her disappearance. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it out. I'm scared. He says he loves me, but he won't let me leave. I just wanted to live my life. I told him tonight would be the last time I see him. I think he believed me." The handwriting was verified by a forensic document analyst and cross-referenced with her journals from college, confirming without doubt it was Megan's. She had written those words in what were likely the final hours of her life. But even with this haunting confession, investigators still had one hurdle: proving how, where, and when she died. They needed a body, something irrefutable, something Ethan Cole couldn't talk his way out of. And then, a tip arrived from someone no one expected. It came from a man named Andrew Tillman, a sanitation contractor, who worked the early morning shift near the warehouse route during the weekend. Megan disappeared. He had never come forward before. Said he didn't think what he saw was important. but something about the renewed coverage in the news made him second guess. "I remember seeing a guy that night," Tillman said, "driving a black SUV, parked half in the shadows, just sitting there. I passed by twice on my route. The second time, he was dragging something, like a rolled-up carpet. I thought he was dumping construction waste. Figured he owned the place." Tillman was shown a photo lineup, immediately identified Ethan Cole. That eyewitness testimony placed Ethan at the warehouse with what could have been Megan's body, and it aligned perfectly with the timestamp from the cell tower pings recovered from the burner phones. Back at the warehouse, investigators began a second round of searching this time, focusing not on burial, but potential chemical disposal. Behind the building, where stormwater drains once carried runoff to the river, they discovered high concentrations of bleach and ammonia in the soil far beyond industrial levels. They sent samples for testing. The result? A partial DNA profile? Megan's? The prosecution was ready. But they knew the case still leaned on a mosaic of evidence texts, surveillance, forensics, digital footprints, a confession by note, but no body. And that meant defense attorneys would pounce on every small gap. And so, the DA made a bold move. They charged Ethan Cole with second-degree murder and announced their intention to pursue life without parole. The move stunned the public. Social media erupted. National coverage reignited. And across Chicago, the name Megan Price was once again on the front page, not just as a victim, but as the spark behind a growing conversation around digital stalking, dating safety, and gaps in missing persons law enforcement. The trial would become one of the most emotionally charged and high-profile court cases in recent Chicago history. The courtroom was packed on the morning of the trial's opening statements, press, protesters, advocacy groups. Strangers who had followed Megan Price's story from the very beginning, all pressed into wooden benches under a weight of tension that was nearly physical. At the prosecution's table, her parents sat side by side, hands clasped. Her younger brother sat behind them, jaw clenched, avoiding eye contact with the man accused of taking his sister's life. Ethan Cole entered wearing a gray suit and an expression that could only be described as calculated indifference. He avoided the gallery entirely. He looked straight ahead. But everyone in the room noticed how he gripped the edge of the defense table a little too tightly. For the first time, it was clear he wasn't in control anymore. The prosecution began with a powerful statement. This case is about a young woman who trusted the wrong person. It's about a man who wore the mask of affection while hiding manipulation, control, and ultimately violence. It's about a society that too often fails to act until it's too late. And it's about the evidence, digital, physical, and emotional, that will prove to you, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Ethan Cole murdered Megan Price. The defense countered with a tactic as old as the courtroom itself. Sow doubt. They questioned the timeline, the missing body, the motives of the witnesses, and even suggested that Megan may have orchestrated her own disappearance. But that argument began to unravel almost immediately. First came the forensics team presenting evidence meticulously. The burner phone records tied to Ethan's home network, the fabric with Megan's blood, the soil samples laced with bleach, the letter found in the crate bearing her handwriting and last desperate words. The scientific evidence was clear, logical, and emotionally devastating. Then came the digital experts showing how Ethan had used anonymizing tools to hide his tracking of Megan's location through her shared calendars and public social media posts. He had monitored her movements through geotagged images and third-party apps, many of which she had no idea were even running on her phone. It was chilling. But nothing landed harder than the witness who took the stand on the trial's 6th day. Her name was Isabel Carr, and no one had known she existed. She had once dated Ethan Cole. Briefly, 2 years before Megan's disappearance. Their relationship had ended badly suddenly, and under mysterious circumstances. She moved out of state afterward and had gone silent, till now. On the stand, Isabel recounted a harrowing experience. She had tried to leave him. He had threatened to make her disappear, referencing how easy it would be if she vanished in a city like Chicago. She said she hadn't come forward before because she thought no one would believe her, that she would be blamed, that he was too careful, too smart to clean. But when she saw the trial coverage online, she said, It was like watching a nightmare I escaped come back to life. I couldn't let her parents go through this without knowing I could have helped. Her testimony stunned the courtroom. But what came next pushed the case over the edge. The prosecution introduced a previously unshared piece of digital evidence and audio memo Megan had recorded the day before her disappearance. It had been stored automatically in her cloud account, synced from her phone's voice memo app. In the audio, Megan's voice is clear, calm, but uncertain. "I'm recording this because I'm scared. I don't want to think anything bad will happen, but if it does, I just want someone to know that I said no. That I told him I didn't want to see him anymore, that he didn't take it well, that he said things that made me afraid. If I'm wrong, delete this. But if I'm not, don't let him say it was anything else." Silence followed. The courtroom held its collective breath. The judge recessed the trial early that day. By the end of the second week, it was clear where the case was going. The evidence, the witnesses, and Megan's own voice had painted a picture so vivid, so detailed, that the defense could no longer hold the narrative. Jurors were weeping. Court reporters struggled to keep composure. The jury deliberated for just under 7 hours. When they returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric thick with tension. Silence so heavy, it felt like a weight pressing down on everyone in the room. Megan's parents held hands tightly. Ethan Cole sat rigid, expression unreadable. The verdict was clear, guilty on all counts. Second-degree murder, unlawful restraint, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering. The judge handed down the maximum sentence life without the possibility of parole. Ethan showed no emotion, no apology, no remorse. But for Megan's family, it was never about watching him break. It was about bringing Megan's story to light. About making sure no other family had to suffer in silence the way they had. At a press conference outside the courthouse, Denise Price said through tears, Megan was bright, kind, and trusting. She saw the good in people, even the ones who didn't deserve it. We couldn't save her, but maybe her story will save someone else. And it did. In the months that followed, the Megan Price Foundation launched national awareness campaigns on digital abuse and stalking, influencing policy discussions in multiple states. Her story became more than a tragedy, it became a catalyst for change. Megan Price may be gone, but her voice still echoes. In her own words, in the memories of those who loved her, and in the actions of a justice system that finally listened. Thank you for watching this episode. If Megan's story moved you, if you believe her voice deserves to be heard far and wide, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a new episode, because every story we tell is one more step toward justice. We'll see you in the next one.